Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar regarding Powerproject BIM. My name is Ben Taunt, and I'll be spending the next 30 minutes going into the more advanced features that exist within this software package. So we're going to do a few introductions. We're going to recap a little bit on how we got to today, and then spend the majority of the session looking at a demonstration of the more advanced features that exist within the software. I'll have a slide at the end about the next steps you may want to take, and there's an opportunity for questions towards the end. If this all sounds a bit familiar, this is because this is part 2 of a 2-part series where yesterday we looked at the introductory features of Powerproject BIM and why you should care in the first place. So what is 4D scheduling and why might I want to use it? If you missed that session and today appears to launch straight into things, you might want to grab the recording of that session from yesterday and you can email us and we'll happily provide you a link to it. Or if you want to sign up to next month's version, again, you can revisit the website and sign up there for future webinars. A couple of things on housekeeping. Everyone's microphone's muted. I can't hear any background noise. If you want to talk to me, please type a question into the panel. I'll do my best to read those as we go along. If not, I'll pick those up at the end of the session. And if I fail to do that, I'll email you a response. The whole session is being recorded once again as well. So after today, you will get a link again to allow you to watch back today's webinar. And you can do that at your own leisure and you can share that with colleagues as well. Let's just recap on where we got to yesterday. We're talking here about the use of Powerproject BIM and that being in a way of delivering 4D planning within an affordable reach. 4D planning being the use of a 3D model, combining that with a Gantt chart or some degree of time information and producing that fourth dimension, a time and 3D molded together environment. Now you can do that within Powerproject by using a bolt-on module. So you're already familiar with Powerproject, and then you get the extra functionality that relates to this BIM component. You import a 3D model, so you need to get a model from some source or other, normally an IFC format. Show that along the Gantt chart. There's a process to go through that we demonstrated yesterday of linking the project activities up to the schedule, getting the model and those tasks all coordinated together. So that's what we did yesterday. We looked at how we can drag and drop items towards each other or use searches to link lots of items to one or more tasks. And the end game being the ability to simulate a model and to do that against either your planned or actual timelines. So we can do a visual impact assessment. And we started yesterday to touch on how we might share that data with other people. And really, this is where we're going to start from today and move forward. And what else can we do within the software that goes over and above that basics of linking up the model and perhaps doing a simple printout? Well, here's a few examples of the topics we might touch on. You may have more than one model. You may have multiple models, and they may themselves have issues in how they're aligned together. So we may also need to talk about the revisions of those models. So as those models get amended as we move forward. So we're going to talk about that today. We're also going to talk about the addition of site objects, that is to say, other 3D models that relate to the building site you're working on. The example on the screen there being that mobile crane. How can we drop that in, move it around and manipulate it? We'll talk a little bit about appearance of items. We already talked yesterday about splitting and baseline comparison with 3D, but we're going to dive a lot more into the properties of these models. We're going to look at things how we can get to quantities information and then the other components to the visualization in terms of getting the camera to swoop around our model, export all of that into a nice video file or some sort of other format for sharing with other people. So those are the sorts of topics we're going to cover today. I'm going to start from where we left off yesterday, which is our model of this little college building here, linked up to a Gantt chart. So the green tasks being our live project dates. As I click on those, you'll see different parts of the model flash as we know that these tasks are linked to different bits. But also these yellow tasks being a baseline, that is to say a read-only version of what we're planning to do, and how on screen we can show two windows, basically a live date and a comparison date. So when I run my timeline, we can look at planned at the bottom and actual at the top. So we can do a visual comparison of where we get to at any given point. A quick reminder about GoToWebinar, it compresses my screen, so you're only seeing a snapshot about twice a second of what's happening, whereas on my screen, these items are appearing in a nice sort of smooth manner, whereas you'll see that red line sort of jump around a bit. My end, I get a nice smooth version of that. But I wanted to really pick up on this model itself and point out that we can look at the properties of it and we can sort of declutter this based on different components. So we can turn off, for example, building elements. But the model itself, what I'm showing on the screen is actually 3 different files. It's 3 independent IFC files I've been given. So the base file is a structural model, just showing the structural components. That's been overlaid with an M&E model. So you can see here, we even go down to each individual sort of light fitting and light switch. And there we go, as a power outlet. So we've got the M&E model as well on top. And then the final piece is the architectural items. That is kind of the glossy bits, I guess, that adds to the full 3D view we've got on screen. So Powerproject has opened up 3 separate files and shown that as a grouped model, which is fine. So we can have extra models and coordinate those and show them all at once. Now, luckily, these models have all been exported consistently using the same coordinate system, and everything's looking nice. But we do have examples we've seen in the past where you might be given models and there's just a clear misalignment. So here I have an architectural model on the right. I have my structural model on the left. And clearly some sort of confusion has occurred when these models have been exported. Perhaps they've been done by different agencies, and therefore we've got an issue with how they've been created. So I actually have an option in my model properties window to look at the alignment of these 2 models. So I can actually grab this structural model and I can make some amendments to its alignment. So the obvious one, I can rotate it 90 degrees, and that at least gets it on the right plane. But I can then grab it on the horizontal, move it around, and start to align it correctly to my other model. Now at this stage, I am doing a visual alignment, so arguably not the most accurate version, but at least within a matter of seconds, I've managed to get my 2 models on top of each other. And that would have saved me the hassle of going back to whoever created this model and say, look, guys, you've made a mistake. We now need an amendment. What I've been able to do is go forward with creating my 4D plan without having to go through the dangers of additional wasted time while we get someone to make that change. So that's our model alignment tab. And again, that's just found under model properties for alignment. But actually within the configuration, if I'd been given a new version of one of these models, I can actually add that as well. So I can actually look at this architectural office block model and manage revisions and add in extra versions. So if I was given a further version of that model, I could add it in. I can give it a new revision name. Let's call it Rev2. And that gets categorized by Powerproject as a different version of the same model. So now under here, I can look and see I've got 2 different revisions I can choose to show. The first version or indeed the second version. So that's a really neat feature, means that you don't have to throw away all the work you've already completed when you get given a revised model. Now you're probably going to ask what happens to the links that we've already created when we get sent a revised model. And that does come down to how we've linked our model up to our Gantt chart. If I take the example of this roof, I simply pick it up, drag it over, and drop it onto a task. That task there on the Gantt chart is linked to the ID code of that roof. It's called the GUID code. It's this massive long number at the top in my properties panel. So Powerproject links that ID code to that task because I did that drag and drop linking between it. If I got given a revised model and that roof was still in there with the same ID code, Powerproject would still link it up without you having to go through that process a second time. Unfortunately, however, if the designer deletes that roof and then redraws it, in that process, they will change the unique code to it. It's a different part number, and therefore you will lose that link. So alternatively, we use the searches that were within Powerproject. And if you use a search, and Powerproject is linking to something which has a property name saying search criteria equals roof, that's then down to the actual tagging of the asset, not its unique code. Therefore, when you get sent a new roof, it's got a new code, so it's got a new asset number, but it will effectively still be called a roof, and Powerproject will remember it. So that's another reason why searches are very powerful to link things up, and why we do recommend you use those in as many cases as possible. So we've brought in multiple models, we've aligned them together, and we've managed the revisions of them. But now I want to add in some extra data into this visualization. Let's say I want to add something else visual within here. And again, within Powerproject, in the Model Properties panel, you'll see a tab here called Site Objects. Now, a site object is simply an IFC model representing some item you want to show on the site. And Powerproject does ship with all of these items here, these 8 or 9 or so files actually ship with Powerproject, so you can use them to your heart's content. So I'm going to pull in a tower crane, show that on my visualization, and Powerproject's popped it in the top corner there. I can then set the position, I can actually scale it, and then move it around so that I can pop that where I want it to be in my visuals. Perhaps rotate it around a bit. And one thing I can also do is change the color. So let's make that dark red. So I now have a dark red tower crane positioned where I want it to be in my visualization. We can't show these cranes moving. I can't show a nice little lorry moving around. But what I can do is have a second tower crane, perhaps somewhere else in my visualization. Perhaps that one's going to sit over here. And let's just pop that down on the surface. So that now means that I can link these models to tasks in my Gantt chart so that they appear at different points and disappear at different points. So if we had some tasks called tower cranes down here, I can have tasks that erect the tower crane and I can have tasks that remove the tower crane. So right at the very beginning, I can have a task that erects that tower crane. I can have another task that removes it. Now I do need to change the properties of that task so that it knows it is a demolition rather than a construction. Otherwise, it's going to try and build it twice. And if I do the same with my second tower crane, and let's have those two just flashing on screen rather quickly. Again, change the properties, make that a removal task. Hopefully now when I run my visualization, we'll get to a point where my task is erected. My crane's erected. We'll get to a stage later on in the activity where those tasks, cranes will be swapped over, and we'll get to that in a moment. And with luck, if I've set this up correctly, one crane disappears and the other crane reappears. So that isn't a movement path. We didn't show the transition between two locations, but it has allowed me to say that tower cranes are going to be in different places at different times. And clearly we can use this functionality, we can play a bit to our heart's content until we've got these cranes in their appropriate positions. Cranes are all well and good. Lots of other little examples we could have used, and you can happily add in any IFC model as it's a single element and show any sort of item you might want to have in your visuals. I changed the color of that crane, which again was very simple. I can also change the color of some of the actual model itself. So if, for example, we don't like the background color, perhaps our grass has died because it's been too hot a summer, I can actually go in here, pick some items and change the colors of them as I see fit. So there's some other properties we can put within it. And then one final item in terms of how we change the appearance, I can use a simulation profile to designate what happens when we're completing a certain task. Now, the example I might have here relates to an internal wall. Now, if I've rendered an internal wall, what does that actually mean? Does it mean the installation of the plasterboard? Is it relating to the painting of that wall? Is it relating to the first fix, second fix, etc.? So the idea is you can assign multiple simulation profiles to the same asset, so different things happen at different times. Rather than simply being constructed, just appearing out of nowhere, I can look at the properties of these and I can have it appear in sort of like a staged manner, or I can have it actually change color when it comes onto the screen. So let's say it's flashing grey when it's plasterboarding, it's flashing pink when it's being painted, it's flashing yellow when it's doing first fix. And I can also change the color based on its status. Is it early, is it late, etc., etc. All of these activities all of these factors I can have in play, and I can assign that simulation profile to the task. Now, if I just reveal more columns, you'll see one here called IFC profile, and that's how I might go about assigning the profile. But the other reason to open up these columns is to look at some of these criteria we've got in here. So if I take the example of, let's use like the pile caps underneath here. That's task number 4. Because I have a search which is linking up all of these pile caps to that activity, let's highlight them all. Powerproject has counted that there are 78 individual pile caps associated with that task. And it's also calculated the combined area and volume of those pile caps. So if I was to use a formula in Powerproject, I could actually write a formula that says how often or how long does it take to pour a certain volume of concrete, how many bricks does a bricklayer lay per hour, and by using the volume and area calculations that exist in Powerproject BIM, that can then help me to automatically assess some sort of duration. It is also a very useful feature when we come to comparing different versions of the same model. We roll back to the topic I mentioned earlier where we bring in a revised model. If the search has found additional pile caps, the old product count will be held in the baseline and the new product count will be held in the live data. That then allows me to do a baseline comparison and effectively check the difference between different versions of my model. I can just prove a point in terms of these calculated areas. If I show here the calculated area of this roof is 15,000 square meters. If I then revise one of the topics we did yesterday, which is to produce this cutting plane, when I do that, and I then choose individual sections of that roof, you'll see the calculated area has dropped to 177. If I choose an additional piece, it's gone up to 354. And as I go through and select additional roof panels, you'll see these calculated areas and volumes over here on the right are increasing as we go through. And that will be reflected in these columns if, for example, the columns are only linked to certain parts of that model. So there we go, that's looking at some of the extra data that sits in the model and really helps me when I'm producing Powerproject BIM projects. Now, when I do hit play on here, you'll see that we run a timeline simulation, as you've seen before, and Powerproject nicely goes through and creates an animation. If I flip to one here where we show something other than Powerproject buildings, everyone always thinks that BIM relates to buildings. It doesn't. It can also link to things like civil projects. I can run a simulation here of this road being constructed, but I've got an extra feature turned on where the camera is going to move automatically without me touching the keyboard, without me touching the mouse. What I've done here is programmatically set an animation path for my camera. So the camera is zooming and panning around as I produce this playback. So what I thought I'd do is create another one of these just to give you an example of how we do it. So if I stop this animation, I go into the fly past menu at the top and choose new. Powerproject wants to know two different pieces of information. It wants to know a time and it wants to know a place. So I'm going to choose the very first task in my project, and I'm going to designate that as my first point in time. I'm then going to move my animation to a certain position. I'm going to have start zoomed all the way out here looking at the entire project. And I'm going to update the viewpoint at that point. I now need to choose a task a little bit further on in time. We could perhaps use this task here, add a new time position, add a new viewpoint. Again, let's just zoom in, update viewpoint. If I now run the animation using that new fly pass, I'm going to start all the way out and then I'm going to zoom in. So I'm just going to test what it looks like, and that looks pretty good. But once I get there, perhaps I want to get to a position where I'm going to spin my camera around. So add a third data point, task start, set task, change viewpoint. I know I'm spinning this pretty quickly past you, but it's just to give you an update, update viewpoint.
Now, if I go back to the beginning, I've got 3 data points. I've got a zoom in, and we do that magically between those 2 tasks. And then I've got a pan to the right, and we do that magically between the next 2 tasks. So by adding in those additional data points, that's how I can go and create fly paths that move between multiple positions. And that really does help to improve the professional nature looking of my output. You'll see under fly paths, the next button is then to create a video. So I can go into here and I can create a new video that looks at the IFC model, or indeed perhaps looks at my comparison model as well. And I can choose whether that's going to be on the left, right, underneath, etc. It asks me to choose a resolution, so I'm going to use 1080. And it asks me to use a compression algorithm, doesn't really matter. But I can then add some extra information on top as well. So I can add some annotations. I can add in the week numbering, or perhaps only the week date, week number. And I can do that in both my main window or my comparison window. I could hit create, and it would spend maybe a minute or so, because it's quite a complex project here, exporting the video file. So to save time, I'll go to one we prepared here. Let's go back to the university buildings, because in this example, I've got the baseline showing. So this is just playing in my Movie Maker. Again, it's compressed at your end, it's smooth at mine, and it's showing me the tasks I'm working on at the bottom. It's showing me the annotations across the top, including the week numbering. And one final thing I did was actually drop the company logo in on as well. So within the video overlay window in Powerproject BIM, I've got all of the controls I need to create these and many other typical videos. So that's the create video option. Underneath that, you'll see create flipbook. Now, flipbook is a series of image files exported at a set point in time. So I can, for example, export a JPEG and have that export on the first Monday of every week. So if I enabled that export and I hit create, what I would do is I would hit create a series of image files, and that would represent my project on the first working day of each month. Again, to save time, I'll show you some I prepared earlier. Again, we're back to the university building for this one, but I've created a whole series of image files to represent the project. If I just open these up, I actually toggle through them, go scroll through the image files, and you'll see I get that flipbook effect of what does it look like each day, each Monday of each month. So that's a very useful way of creating data you might want to use in PowerPoint presentations, update meetings, etc., etc. Now, this is all well and good, but what about if I want to create an export based on a particular trade or particular resource or some sort of other status? And to do that, in Powerproject, I've got the ability to filter my project. Now, filters can be pre-coded or you can create your own. So I'm going to create a filter that just looks at the columns and the supporting tasks. So that creates me a subset of my project. In the BIM window, I need the BIM window to reflect the current tasks on view. And that now shows me only those supporting columns that we talked about. Therefore, when I do my playback, I can choose to only animate the supporting items, only the items which are currently in my project plan. So now I've got an animation where I'm only rendering the supporting columns. I'm not rendering the other items that might be applicable to the project. So I've coded my project, I've run a filter based on that, and I'm now running an animation, again, based on that filtered view. And if I was to do a file print at this stage, what I would get is only a project plan that has the representative items that I've got on screen. So let's just find a BIM chart. I've got a filtered project and I've got a filtered view. Okay, I haven't chosen a particularly impressive one, but at least you get the point there. And really, that was the full extent of the software that I was going to talk about today. Again, an awful lot of information squeezed into just that half-hour segment. So if you've got any questions for me now, please do tap them into the GoToMeeting control panel, and I'll be able to have a quick read of those and answer them as I go through the last few steps. One thing we talked about yesterday was the ability to save to a project viewer file. I do want to recap that. If you do want to save Powerproject in a way that can be fully analyzed by other people, there is a free viewer to allow you to look at both the baselines, the live project data, and also the model all into one compressed file. You can get that from our website. And if today's session has done enough to convince you that Powerproject BIM is useful to your projects, then we'd be delighted to help you to trial it live. If you already have a Powerproject license, please speak directly to us or to your local distributor, and we will set you up a trial within your own license. If you do not yet have a license of Powerproject, then don't worry, you can go to our website and download the free version from there. So if you haven't got Powerproject, just grab it off the website. If you already have Powerproject, don't use the website version because it will screw up your licensing. Ask us to manually add it to your project Powerproject license, and we'll happily do that for you. The software is licensed in the same way, and the BIM module is licensed in the same way as the core module. You can either buy a single user license, that is to say a license that resides on one machine, or you can add a number of Powerproject BIM licenses to a concurrent server license, so you can share Powerproject BIM licenses across your network. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one mapping, so you can have multiple Powerproject standard licenses and perhaps one or two BIM licenses, and whoever opens up the IFC file would need to use the BIM license. Everybody else can continue using standard Powerproject. And again, I touched on it yesterday, there's a training course as well. So again, if you're listening from outside the UK, please contact your local distributor and they'll happily provide you with all this information in your own currencies, training courses in your own regions, etc. And if you are listening from within the UK, give the sales team a call and we'll happily help you move forward. Okay, no questions popped up so far, so I'm going to call it a day now. There will be a feedback form that pops up on your screen, and I do appreciate it if you could take a couple of minutes, well, just a couple of seconds, there's only 3 questions, just answer those so we've got a view of what it is you want to do with Powerproject BIM moving forwards. Other than that, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure to help you understand the real depth that exists within Powerproject BIM.